Rigging is one of the most essential parts of animation. It's your main interface with the character and the way you animate, on top of which the whole thing is built. So it's important you have a good rig, because a good rig will make your life a lot easier, while a bad one is gonna make it hell. And I'm here to teach you how to make good ones. So listen up, take notes, and subscribe. When it comes to rigging, we always think of skeletons, or armatures as Blender calls them. Although you could technically make a fully functional rig without any armatures whatsoever. You can parent multiple objects in a hierarchy and make them move just like a rig, so what's the point? Well, for one, armatures are much more organized. Two, they let you do so much more when it comes to constraints and controls and stuff like that. And three, they make exporting animations 1,000 times easier, so let's learn what they are. Armatures are chains of bones in a hierarchy with a head and a tail. The head is the pivot point and the tail is the end point of the next bone. They can be connected or disconnected, parented or unparented, or a part of its own hierarchy altogether, depending on your needs, of course. Once you have an armature, you can assign geometry to it and it will move with the armature. Technically, all you really need is the pivot points on these bones, since those are what drives the transformation, but having the tail there makes it easier to visualize. In Blender, press Shift and A to add an armature, and this thing you see in the viewport is a single bone. We can make a simple bone hierarchy by hopping into Edit mode, selecting the head or the tail, and extruding it to build the tree. You can change the bone's parenting or connected attributes in the Bone Properties panel in the Relationships dropdown. If you want to preview how the hierarchy works, you can do that in Edit mode. This is where you set up the skeleton. You need to hop into Pose mode by pressing Ctrl and Tab or visiting this dropdown up here. This is where you get to move, use, and animate your rig, and you can see exactly how your bone chain works based on the hierarchy you've set up. Okay, but how do you actually assign geometry to it? Well, that depends on what you're rigging. First, we need to talk about skinning. Skinning is a process of assigning the influence of each bone on the rig to individual vertices on your model. The values go from 0 to 1, where 1 is full influence, 0 is no influence, and the values in between are partial influence. It's easiest to depict as a gradient. Any vertex can be affected by as many bones as you want, as long as all the influences add up to 1. Usually that influence, or that weight, is painted by a brush. That's why this process is called weight painting. We know two approaches to skinning. On one hand, we have rigid or separate type of skinning, and on the other hand, we have bendy/deforming. I'll explain both and I'll rig my own character in the end to put everything into practice. First up, we've got rigid type of skinning, which is the simpler of the two. Rigid skinning is used when your character is made up of multiple objects and none of them deform, they just move along and rotate. You'll often see these kinds of rigs on robots. The way you do this is by hopping into Pose mode on your rig, selecting the bone you want to parent to, then hop back into Object mode. That bone is still technically selected, so now you can select your object, or multiple objects. Then select the armature last, so the armature is the active selection. Press Ctrl P to parent and select Bone. So all these objects are now parented to the selected bone. Alternatively, you can select all of your objects, then select the armature last, press Ctrl P to parent, and then pick Parent to Armature with empty groups. Technically, all these objects are now parented to the armature, but they're not assigned to any bone, so far nothing happens. Now, however, the objects receive new vertex groups in the Object Data Properties tab. And those groups have the same names as your bones. Here's another reason to keep your bones nicely renamed. I always say organization. It makes things so much easier. Now you can select all the objects, hop into Edit mode, then select them with the L shortcut. Then in the vertex group, select the bone you want to parent your selection to, make sure the weight is set to 1, and click Assign. You've technically weight painted this entire object to that bone by giving it a value of 1, so now it's gonna move with it. There's much more visual ways to weight paint, and we'll do that in a second. Don't worry, just wanted to show you this. Once you do this for every object, you should have a rigid rig that moves the parts around without deformations. If you want deformations though, you need to do weight painting, which I mentioned before, which is where bendy skinning comes into play. As mentioned before, weight painting is a method of assigning weight to different vertices on your mesh to the bones on the armature to ensure proper and wanted deformation during the animation. That was a heckin' rhyme I did. This bone will affect these vertices by this much, and that bone will affect those vertices by that much. Again, we sort of did that in the previous step, we just assigned the maximum weight to full objects. Now we're just gonna do it with a brush. Okay, assignment time. To rig this guy, first make the middle row of bones, starting at the crotch, so that's our main root bone, and rename all of them. Now make one of the sides and rename that as well. Select all the bones on the sides and press Ctrl and F2. Since F2 is a shortcut that renames things and Ctrl and F2 is a shortcut that batch renames things. It makes sense. Set this box to selected and bones. Set the type to set name, and the method to suffix, meaning it will add something at the end of the word. That's what a suffix is. Put the name to .l, which will add a .l at the end of your existing name. It's important to put the dot before the L because that's how Blender recognizes namespaces, which will make the next step possible. Select the side bones and then right-click and click Symmetrize to mirror the bones. Because of the naming convention we used, the bones are flipped and the .l turns into .r automatically, so the naming is all done. Just a tip. Now that the armature is all set, we need to bind it to the model, and the simplest way to do this is to select your model, then the armature, press Ctrl-P to parent, and here choose Parent to Armature with automatic weights instead of empty weights this time. This basically did the weight painting automatically, which is very cool, but it's not the best, so we'll probably have to tweak this later. But for now, your model moves! Woo! This step also works with multiple objects at a time. Now to fix the weight painting, we need both the model and the armature selected, but the model has to be the active selection this time, because weight painting is an attribute stored on the model, not on the rig. So select the armature first and the model second, and then, through Ctrl-Tab or this drop-down up here, enter weight painting mode. Here you'll see a rainbow. In short, the highlighted bone is the one you're painting the weights to, and the colors represent the weight itself. Blue is 0, meaning no influence, and red is 1, meaning max influence. To switch between bones, hold down Alt and click. You have a brush where you can press F to change the size or Shift F to change the strength. Additionally, you have the strength slider at the top, as well as a weight slider. So the weight slider is the weight you want to paint, and the strength slider is like an opacity for the brush. If you want to fix the weight painting, you're basically trying to paint more or less effect in different areas for each bone. For example, here it's dragging too much of the behind, so I'm painting that out. It's always smart to pose the bone first and then do the weight painting on the pose, so you already see what it's going to look like when it's deformed, and it's easier to see where all the issues are. You might run into deformation issues in places where you don't have enough subdivisions, since deformation happens on the vertices. Simply add more, adjust your weight painting, and it's all gonna be fine. To paint the weights from scratch, parent your model with empty groups, hop into weight paint mode, and in the options dropdown, turn on the auto normalize option. Since each vertex can be influenced by multiple bones at once, this option will limit the weight, so the maximum it can have across all the bones combined is always going to be 1. That means if you paint over an area which is already assigned to a different bone, the value will be taken away from that bone to accommodate for your brush stroke. Once you have this set up, select the root bone and paint the whole model. You can make use of the gradient tool by dragging it away from the mesh so it all turns red. And because of the auto normalize option, this bone is now the only bone with any effects on the mesh. Then select the next bone in the chain and paint everything from its effect up, which will take that away from the root bone. But that's fine since the root bone is still the parent of this bone, so when you move it, it's gonna look normal because it moves with it. It doesn't matter. Then simply move up the chain and paint each next bit until you have the weight painting all done. You can help yourself with masks. Select your mesh, hop into edit mode, and select the area you want to mask out. With this area selected, exit edit mode, so these vertices are still technically selected just like with the armature before. Now select the armature and mesh, and hop into weight paint mode. Because this area is still selected, you can use it as a mask up here, either by showing you the faces or the vertices. It's just a display thing, they both do the same thing. So now this is the only area you can paint on. This is useful if you want to use the gradient tool to help you paint, but you don't want to mess up the rest of the model. Anyway, here are some other weight painting tricks you can use. You can assign automatic weights only to the selected bones, by first selecting them in pose mode, then going back into object mode. Then select your character, hop into weight paint, then open the weights dropdown and click Assign automatic weights from bones. This will give automatic weights to selected bones, but will leave your other bones alone. You can drop down the display option and turn on wireframe to see the paintable vertices easier. In tool settings, there's a symmetry option, which is the same as the one up here. This will basically mirror your paint strokes. To smooth your weight paint a little, drop down the weights dropdown and click smooth. And once the model is properly weight painted, we can create some easy to use controls, which is where rigging really comes to life. There is no right or wrong way to create controls as long as they make all the required movements possible and simple to animate. So I'm just gonna show you a bunch of useful ones and you do with that what you will. Okay, let's make an IK handle. An IK handle is a control on the rig which dictates the endpoint of a bone chain. In order for it to work best, it also requires a pole vector so it knows which direction to make the bends. So to create the IK handle, I'll extrude this bone out, so both the bone heads are in the same place. Then I'll make the bone disconnected, remove its parent in the bone properties tab, and rename it. Now because this is a controller bone, it's not actually binded to the mesh and it's not gonna deform the mesh, I'm gonna tick off this deform option. This is just for optimization and for when you're exporting this rig into other softwares, but it's a good practice to have, so turn it off. For the pole vector, I'll extrude the bone from the bent joint, also disconnect it and remove its parent, rename it, and bring it out in front like so. Then also turn off the deform. Turn it off! We now have the required structure to make the IK controls. Hop into pose mode and select the bone pointing into the IK handle. Now open the Bone Constraints tab. This is where you create different constraints, rules, and conditions for the bones, which can make really smart control systems. Click the dropdown and add an inverse kinematics constraint. For the target, pick the current armature, and for the bone, pick the IK bone. If the IK bone doesn't work, just move the middle joint forward a little so it knows in which direction it has to bend. I've had similar issues before and I look like a total idiot. I don't get it. I don't understand. What is wrong? Technically, it should work now, but we're not done yet. For the pole target, also pick the armature, but for its bone, pick the pole vector bone. Your bone chain might flip around, so just mess with the pole angle until it's pointing back where it should, and also set the chain length to the amount of bones you want to be affected by this. In my case, that's 2, so the shin and the femur bone. So now the IK handle will move the end point of the leg, and the bend will always point towards the pole vector. You've got perfect control. However, the foot is now rotating with the shin. We don't want that. Let's make it so that we can control the rotation of the bone with the IK handle as well. In edit mode, disconnect the foot and remove its parent. Then in pose mode, give it a child of constraint, and make the parent the IK bone. The foot is no longer affected by the shin, but it's instead mimicking the IK handle bone. So the IK handle moves the leg and it also rotates the foot. This is a complete leg rig if you ask me. However, people usually set up FK to IK switches. That is a little bit more complicated, and I can make a separate tutorial on it if you want to, or you can just watch one of the many already available sources out there. Let me know in the comments or join my Discord server so you can suggest and vote for my videos. This one was voted. There are also a lot of other useful constraints, such as copying different attributes, limiting transformations, volume preservation, stretching or tracking to different objects or bones, or so much more. This is something I encourage you to play around with, see what they do, and then try to incorporate these tools into your rigs. You'll learn best if you do it yourself. Finally, you can make the bones look nicer and more organized by changing their color and appearance. You can easily change the bone's color in the Bone Properties tab in the Viewport Display dropdown. You can change the bone's color individually for the Object and Edit mode, as well as Pose mode. So you could color your control bones one color and deform bones another color. You can color the left and right differently, or you can come up with your own system that makes sense to you, because you're using that rig, not me. You can hide the bones you're never gonna touch. Here, I know I'll never animate the leg bones because I got the IK handle, so I'll hide these bones in the viewport display so they'll just not show up while I work and not bother me. To bring them back, simply select them in edit mode and then unhide them in pose mode. It's kinda dumb, but you hit it, deal with it. You can also make custom appearances for your bones in the viewport display dropdown by picking a custom object for it, toggle the wireframe mode or not, or offset its position, rotation, and scale. But that's only for the viewport display. It's not gonna actually mess up the pivot of your bone. We also got bone layers. They're in the Armature Data tab. By default, all bones will be assigned to the already existing bones group, but you can remove or assign them to other groups. You can also hide them or solo that layer. That being said, you can hide all your deformer bones and only show the control bones, so the rig is much cleaner and less confusing and scary to use. Just make it work for you. And the last layer of the rigging process is drivers. What are drivers? Imagine it like you take one value, let's say this cube's Y position, we'll call that var. So we'll take it, we'll apply a bunch of math to it to normalize it, and then use this new value as, let's say, the hue shift effect in the hue saturation value node for the material of this sphere, for example. Now that example is not very useful, but it demonstrates what drivers can do. It lets you drive one value with another one, and applying math and logic in between. You could set it up so the rotation of the bone affects different blend shapes to correct the shape of the deformations as the thing bends, or add a custom integer property which toggles different modes on the rig and so on. You can set up any driver by right-clicking a value, for example this screw's Z rotation, and clicking Add Driver. You'll get this little window you can move around, and if you happen to click away like me, because I'm a dumbass, you can always right-click the value and select Edit Driver to get it back. Alternatively, you can also click Open Driver Editor, which will open a new window with all the same settings as before, as well as a graph, for when you don't want to do the math but want to visualize it instead. There are many kinds of drivers, but today we'll focus on scripted expression. I can also make a full tutorial on drivers if you want. This is way too much for one video, so once again, make sure to join my Discord if you want to suggest your ideas. Also subscribe, damn it. Down here is our input variable, and up here is the equation for it. I'll explain everything, don't worry. The input variable is saying var, which is the same name I used in my example video. That's just the name of the value, nothing else. You can rename this to anything you want. So here you need to pick the driving attribute. What is this value going to be? Let's say I want the valve bone's X rotation to drive this. So the object is the armature, the bone is the valve bone, and here we pick the X rotation. Problems arrive when you look at spaces. This is currently set to world space. If you look at the bone, it is rotated on the x-axis in the world space. You know, it's not aligned with the world x-axis because the rig is sideways. So we're getting values from this already. I want the driver to respond only when the bone itself rotates on its x-axis. So we'll change this world space into post space, since this is the value we're looking at. Now the bone's X rotation is driving the screw's Z rotation, and no other value is intervening whatsoever. But we can have the same value driving multiple things. For example, the screw's Z location. I can right-click, copy driver, and right-click, paste driver. But why stop there? I think the screw is moving too fast on the Z-axis. So I'll edit this driver up here, and instead of var being my output, I want the output to be var divided by 2, so /2. So the output is going to be var, which is the bone's X rotation value, divided by 2, so it's twice smaller, which means it's gonna go twice slower. There we go, we've made a valve that rotates a screw using only one control. Another quick example, I'm gonna add 2 spheres and a cube. Name the spheres 1 and 2, and add a driver on the cube's Z location. In this driver, I'll name the input variable to 1. Ignore this warning, it doesn't matter. And choose sphere 1 and its Z location in world space. Then I'll add another input variable, yes, you can do that, name it 2, choose sphere 2 and its Z location in world space. As for the output, I'll delete this var because we have no var expression anywhere, just 1 and 2, so I'll type 1 minus 2 instead. So the Z location on the cube will be equivalent to sphere 1's Z location minus the sphere 2's Z location. Like this. Pretty sick, huh? I could always edit the driver and change the values like X scale in local space, so now the scale is affecting the Z position and so on. Most common examples of drivers are converting motion, turning on blend shapes, and smart switches. This is also why it's so hard to make a tutorial on them, because they're so broad and limitless. You can do whatever you want with them, you can chain them together, there's so much to cover. It's free real estate. For my gear series intro, I've literally set up drivers, so a single value was turning all the gears in the proper ratios with the number of teeth and so on. It saved me a lot of work with animation, so just apply the knowledge to your current situation. And now that you know all this, I'm gonna create a rig for one of my own models to show you how you can put rigging into practice. Let's time travel into the future! Hey look, it's the future and my hair is short now. Alright, so I made this model of a bacteriophage, and yes, that is a thing that exists in real life. I just made it all mechanical and stuff because it looks cool. And now I'm gonna rig it. So the first step is adding the armature. So Shift A, add an armature. And I'm gonna hop in here in the Object Properties tab, and in the Viewport Display, I'm gonna tick on in front. So it's always gonna appear in front of the whole model. So the root bone has to be in the center of my base object. This is gonna be its pivot point. It's gonna rotate from here, bring this down, because I want each segment to be one bone. One bone for this. I'm just extruding this up. One bone for this. And I think the top one is also going to be affecting the head. So this thing and the head are going to move together. We're going to need controls for the legs. These are all parented and connected, right? I'm going to duplicate this bone. I'm going to put it here. And this one, if we take a look, it should have a parent. So it's going to have a parent of this bone. So I have to rename them.
A few moments later.
Its pivot has to be inside this circle because this is where it's going to rotate from. So I'm just making sure that it's actually positioned there, and it looks like it is. And the tail, I'm just going to put it here. I don't like how big this is, so in the data, I'm going to go to Viewport Display, and it's going to be from octahedral to stick. So I'm going to put this tail in here. And now I'm just going to extrude it down to the leg. And rename the second one knee 1. This is the leg one, and this is the knee one. Then I'm gonna put my pivot point to the 3D cursor. So whatever I do to this, it's gonna rotate from the 3D cursor. Now I'm gonna duplicate this and press R to rotate, Z on the Z axis by 60, because it's 1/6 of 360 degrees, so it flops into the correct spot. Leg 2 and knee 2. So duplicate, rotate on the Z by 60, and rename. Okay, so we have all of the bones. We've got this one, which is the root bone. We have all the neck joints as well as the head, and all the legs have their own joints. So this is all the movement we're gonna have on this. Now I guess the next step is to start binding this. In pose mode, select this bone and then hop out. Now I'm gonna select the body and then select the rig, Control P, parent to bone. So now, when I move it, this is going to be parented to it. And I'll do the same with the legs. Select the bone, hop out, select the leg, select the rig, Control P the parent, bone. So now when I move this, it's going to be parented to the bone. Now select this, hop out, select this, select that, parent to bone. This should rotate from the cylinder. This should not be breaking, so it looks like it's actually, you know, slotted into the correct spot. Now I'm gonna do this for all the bones.
2 hours later.
So now every single bone is going to move, you know, the legs. There is a problem here with the rope. We're gonna fix that later. I think there's also a problem when I move this, the legs should also move. So select the leg, go into the bone properties. Oh wait, I have to be in edit mode. Set the parent to the root. And I'm gonna do that for all of them. So back into pose mode, if I move the root bone, they all move with it. And then this is going to, you know, move the legs. So we have this down. Now let's tackle the upper body and then we're gonna fix all the ropes. So this is made out of multiple parts. So the neck is one thing, but then because it's segmented and the top and the bottom are different, plus they're not going to be deforming, they're going to move with the others, they're separate objects, so the top and the bottom are completely separate. But then on the inside, there's also this like inner neck. When the thing's going to bend, there's going to be tiny little segments visible through it, so I just put some black rubber in the center. I need to select all of them now. Select all of those, then select the rig last, just Control P, parent to armature with automatic weights. So now only these items are parented with automatic weights. So now if I move this, they're going to deform, they're gonna break a little bit. But I don't think we're gonna have an angle this sharp here because there's like 14 bones. If we need the bacteriophage to turn 90 degrees, almost like we have here, it's gonna be spread between 14 bones. So the deformations are gonna be very minimal, maybe this at most. Yeah, it's a little wonky, but with minimal deformations like this, it's gonna be perfectly fine. I'm gonna have this selected, this top bone, exit, but the head is made up of multiple parts. So we have the head, but then inside the head, there's also the head light. So select this, select the head, and select the support. So this is the entire head. Then select the rig, Control P, parent to bone. When you do this now, the head is going to follow. So we have the base skeleton. So if you move this, everything should move except the cables. We haven't done those yet. We'll do these next. The legs control the legs, and the neck is properly done. Next thing we have to figure out is the cables. So this is now still a Bezier curve, right? It's made up of curves. I can move it around very smoothly, may I say so. If I want to weight paint this, I have to turn it into a mesh. Cable 1 to 6. I guess I could just select all of them now and convert to mesh. So they're all meshes. And I'm also going to press Control J to merge them. There's no need for them to be separate objects now. So I'm going to select my cables. Then I'm going to select the armature, Control P to parent, and parent with empty groups. I want to make the weight paint from scratch. Now I want to weight paint, so the cables have to be the active selection. So select the rig, select the cables, hop into weight paint, the / key on my numpad to isolate all this. Any bone that I select is all empty. And I'm also going to come up here under the viewport overlays button and I'm going to turn on wireframe so I can see what I'm painting on. I'm going to select the root bone. So I'm going to put the weight to 1, strength to 1. So I'm painting full influence here. I am going to paint the middle section here. It's going to take a little while. I got a better idea. I'm gonna select these, hop into edit mode, select the first row of faces. That's gonna make it easier. Now press Control and plus to extend that selection. All of these parts are going to be affected completely by the root bone. Make sure you exaggerate this a little bit. And now hop out of edit mode. Now select this, select that, hop back into weight paint mode. And now I can turn on the mask. So I can only paint on these. Add a gradient with a strength of 1, drag away, so everything is red. Okay, if I turn off the wireframe here, you can see that the root bone is affecting everything 100%. So if I move this, the bottom is going to be affected, but none of the rest are going to be. I'm going to start painting the legs. Now turn on the auto normalize thing. Because we exaggerated a little bit here, we have the freedom to make the mask for the leg. Go into object mode, actually go into edit mode. I'm going to select a ring of vertices up here, press Ctrl and plus enough where this selection comes down here. Now back into weight paint mode, turn on the mask, and this is what I'm painting. So I'm just gonna do my gradient trick again. So this is all 1. If I switch to the root bone, you can see that they're exactly in the same place, right? Which is good. Now the last thing, I'm gonna hop back into edit mode for the leg. I'm gonna select these rings for the last band of the leg. Back into weight paint mode, select this leg with the auto normalize still on, turn on mask, and with the gradient, paint everything. And now if you jump between this, you can see that this has been taken away from the previous leg. Now it's not looking the best yet. It's kind of bending. We're gonna make it smoother a little bit in the end, but this is not too bad for a start. Now I'm gonna do this for all the legs and I'm gonna come back.
One eternity later.
Okay, we got the root bone done and all the other bones are respectively binded. Now I want to hop back into object mode and press / to come back out of this. And I just want to make a test. When I do this, I feel like the rope should move a little bit, so we have to smooth this part out. This part is okay, actually. It looks like it's behind the wheel, which is perfect. We need to smooth out the bottoms, so when this thing turns, some of this rope should be affected as well. I'm gonna select this now, because there is a blur tool, I believe, and if I do something like this, I can blur this a little bit. So when this happens, that feels more natural, and even ripples a little bit on the bottom. That's cool. It should all be the same, right? 3 hours later. Yeah, okay, it's close enough. It's something that no one's gonna see anyway. I just wanted to show you can do that as well. We basically have the rig done. We just need some special controls as well as some nice displays, and this should be all done. I think we can start by hopping into the edit modes. I'm gonna select the head. I'm gonna extrude out a little bone here, IK1. And this bone is not gonna have a parent, it's not gonna be connected. Okay, cool. Now from this knee, I'll extrude another bone up, pole vector 1, because the leg is gonna be a pole vector. It's also gonna be disconnected without a parent. Sometimes it's not gonna be unparent, so I have to deselect and select. That's a known bug. Don't worry about it too much. And I'm gonna do that for all of them. Time to rig, hop into pose mode for this. Leg number 1, select it in the constraints, give it a inverse kinematic constraint. Target is going to be the bacteriophage rig. Bone is going to be the IK1. Pole vector is going to be the rig, and bone is going to be pole vector 1. It should move. However, the chain length should be 2. But then the angle is off. It looks like by 180 degrees, so let's type 180, so flip it back up, and this should now work. I have a functional leg. A fun thing, now when I move this, the IK is going to stay in place, which is going to look very nice in the end. So let's do this for all the legs. Second one, give it a constraint, inverse kinematics, bacteriophage IK2, bacteriophage pole vector chain length 2, pole angle, I don't think it's a round number, so I'm just gonna have to eyeball it a little bit. 135 is gonna do. Now we have the IK handles that move all the legs. Oh, just be careful you don't cross the line of sight with the pole vector or it's gonna flip around like that. So when you move this, make sure you also move this out the way. And a quick way to fix this, going to the pole vectors and choose the parent IK6. So whenever you move the parent, this is going to move with it. It's going to minimize the effects. This is pole vector 1, so let's give this the parent IK1. Let's give this one the parent IK2. Another cool thing is that now you can make your thing dance, right? You can make it dance. So what do you do if you want to move the whole thing, but now you can't? Because these things are set in stone. There's two nice methods. So one of them is you could parent the IK to the body, but then you can't really animate it. Another is you go to the IK handle and give it a child of constraint to the root bone. When the root bone moves, this is going to move with it. However, now we have the influence slider. So if you turn this off, it's not going to be parented. And if you turn this back on, it is going to be parented. And you can animate that. You can do it with drivers. So IK1 is going to be the main one. So select the IK1 and then copy the data path of this influence, right? Then go to any other one and right click and add a driver. The driver is going to be a scripted expression, and instead of the transform channel is going to be a single property. It's going to be the bacteriophage rig, and the path we're going to copy here. So this is the child of influence, right? This var plus 1, just make it var, so it's exactly the same. What we just did is this value here, which is driven, is the same as this one. We've pasted in the data path of this one. So whenever this is 0, this is also going to be 0. Whenever this is 0.4, this is going to be the same. You can have all of them follow along, but then you decide, oh, I don't want that anymore, and all of them are just going to turn off to 0. So it's one control for all of them. Normally, you would put that control on a separate bone, so it's not in your legs. I just did a very quick demonstration. I'm going to get rid of those, because the third method is much simpler, and it's something that most people do. You duplicate the root bone, move it down. Then I'm going to rename the root bone to body, and this is going to be my root bone, so this is going to be root, and now the body is simply going to be, the parent is going to be the root bone. The root bone is usually on the same height as your rig, and now what you do is you simply select your IKs and parent all of them to the root bone. Okay, so when you move the body, it's gonna dance. When you move the root, it's gonna move. Why does this work? Well, because all of these are parented to the root bone, so the root bone is going to move them around. These are not parented to the body, so so the body can do whatever it wants. So you have both controls, one for the whole rig and one for just the body. The neck, I think we can also just get away with a simple IK handle. This is not scripted, by the way, so I'm just improvising as I go. Extrude this one, IK head. Extrude that. Pole vector. Oh yeah, and also remove parent, remove the form, move it out, pose mode, and I'm gonna give this an IK constraint. Let's count the bones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Target, bacteriophage, bone, IK head. Pole vector is gonna be the bacteriophage, bone, pole vector, head. Chain length, we've counted 15. It should be fine, but if you move the pole vector, it's not really bending. Even if you move this down, it's not bending. Why is that so? Because it needs a direction. Let's select all of these, nudge them on the side a little bit. We should get deformed, right? However, it's now facing away from this. Pole angle to 180. Pole angle is what attracts it, right? And this works pretty nicely. Parent this to the IK head. When the IK head moves and rotates, this rotates with it. The rig itself is now complete. All we need now, I think, is just the controls and some aesthetics to make it look nicer. I don't think we will need any of these bones. Viewport display, hide, and this one, hide, and this one, hide. If you want to do this for multiple bones at once, you can't just click, because that's only going to affect the main selection. Alt-click. If you alt-click, you can do this for multiple bones. Boom, and hide all of these. So all I'm left with is control bones. The root bone, which this also has to be parented to, so the root bone affects everything, and this one makes some dance. However, I don't think the head should be doing this while it's dancing. Instead of the root, I'll parent it to the body. It's going to follow the body. The body is parented to the root, so it's also gonna follow the root, but it's not gonna dance with the body. I think this should be individual, because legs have contact with the floor, they should stay there. The head does not. But now the final thing that I want to do is give this some nice controls. So I'm gonna make a new collection, I'm gonna call it controls. So in this controls collection, I'm going to make a bunch of items which I'm going to use as a display for the rig. Mesh circle, 6 subdivisions, so it's like a hexagon. I'm gonna go with a circle, 33. And for the pole vectors, I'm gonna do something fancy. Let's add a cube. I'm gonna isolate it for now. Merge this to the center and make it a pyramid. Pole vector controller. Now come back into the rig. Let's start with the roots, and custom shape is going to be the root controller, like this. I could technically change it in edit mode, like let's flip it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. However, you can always just come here and, you know, change the scale manually to like 5, no, more. Let's say this is gonna be my root. The body control, I'll just go with the same root control, but it's gonna be smaller. Change the Y. Okay, so it's a little higher up, so it's easier to click. This one could have yellow bone color. The body is also kind of main, but it's smaller. I like to go with green, so this is always gonna be green. These are gonna have a custom shape of the IK controller. What is with this rotation? Maybe scale it down a little bit, so it's like... And I'm gonna give this, let's say blue. Make this an IK controller. Oh, the head as well. It's 90 degrees. Oh, it's not on the Y, it's on the X. It's also gonna be blue, screw it. And the pole vectors are gonna be the pole vector controllers. And for these, I'm gonna take on wireframe, so they're only gonna be wireframe. And just rotate and give it a red color. But this one I'm also gonna scale up. It's much more obvious. So this, for the most part, is the rig. Turn off relationship lines because they're annoying. But there is one more thing we have to do here. So let's hop into material mode. If I select this and move that, the rope doesn't feel right. The cable should be extending and stuff, right? So I think there's something we can do here. Let's take a look at leg number 1. I'm gonna select it, hop into pose mode. Here I can unhide it, and I'll also unhide this one. I can't move it because it's a part of the IK constraint, so if I come here and turn it off for now, I'm looking for the up and down. It's not the Y value, so it has to be the Z value, right? And this, I'm guessing, is also the Z value. When they extend or contract, the rope should sort of move. We're not gonna rig that, obviously, but we can sort of cheat that with texture. I'm gonna try to use a driver to make the texture look like it's moving. Coming into the shader editor, all I've really got here is a wave texture with some mapping nodes to place it, and then using that as the color and the height information, so it kind of looks like a cable rope. However, because of the mapping node, I can offset the X location, so it looks like the cable is moving up and down. So, let's say I want to add a driver. I'm also going to open drivers and select this bone so I can have it here, right? Actually, this is all I need. I have this driver here in the node editor, and the drivers are hidden here. This is my driver. Now I'm gonna drive this texture with both bones. So with the first one and with the second one. So I have to put them in as variables. So name the first one leg, bacteriophage rig, and it's going to be the leg 1 bone, Z rotation, local space. And then I'm gonna add another input variable, which is going to be the knee, bacteriophage, and it's going to be, oh wait, it has to be transform channel. Knee 1, Z rotation in local space. So whenever these two move, these two variables are going to be here. Now we have to figure out, when this moves up, so when the value here is positive, the rope has to come in, and when this moves up, it also has to come in. Okay, perfect, so they're going in the same direction. If, let's say, the leg moving up would give me a negative value, I would just have to flip the input, just put a minus in front of it. When this is positive, it goes up. When it's negative, it goes down. So these two positive values, when they go positive, the x has to go negative, right? Because it has to be brought in when these move. Type in the equation, right? We need both of these to give me a negative value. So let's say minus leg, so the negative value of the leg, because we need a negative result, plus, and in brackets, negative knee. The value of x is going to be the combined negative of both of them. So when they go up, the x goes down. And no matter which one of them goes up, the x is gonna go down. So let's see. You see it moving? Like it's pulling on something, right? But this shouldn't be as strong, right? Let's come back here. This knee, I don't want this to be that effective, so let's divide the knee by 10. So the knee is going to contribute like 1/10 of the motion. When this moves, it looks normal. When this moves, it's barely moving. Perfect. So we have the rig all done. However, there's one issue. This is all the same material, right? So when I move this leg, the rope moves on all of them. The solution to this would be to separate all the cables and have each of them have their own cable material and driven by their own local legs. Now, I don't want to do this because honestly, I don't think this will be visible in the animation at all. So I'm just going to hop into the shader editor and delete the driver. The rope is not going to move. I don't care enough about it. And with that being said, this is the complete rig. I've used all the same methods that I taught you about. I put them into practice so you see how they work and little problems you might encounter in the way. We've got the root bone moving, rotating, and it also works with scale, so that's great. Then we have the body control up here, which makes the robot dance. You can also turn that. Then we have individual legs, which can be animated, as well as, you know, turned around with the pole vector, so you have full control over all of those. Then we have an IK handle for the head, as well as the IK handle here, which can rotate all this. And I think that's a solid rig. I hope you learned something. If you did, smash like, subscribe, and join my Discord server. I'm not asking anymore. But in all seriousness, thanks for watching, see you next time, and stay sharp.